Hello, Warlords. Welcome to Saga Thursday. I'm your host, Rodge, as always, joined once again by my good pal, Mr. Monty here. How's it going?
Rodge, it's going great. How about yourself?
Oh, I am doing excellent as well. So, wow, time really has flown here. It seems like we're just talking just like a week ago about everything
Yep.
we were up to, but time flies, and we got a lot to talk about today. So,
Yes,
I think we got to jump right in here. So I've got Saga news up front here. So as far as official rule books and stuff like that, I don't think anything's going on that front since last time. Now, we do have the Adepticon events are up on the official page there, I saw, Monty.
Yep.
Okay, and it's just like the little teasers there. Basically, you're going to be able to register this weekend, if I recall correctly, but there won't be the full rule synopsis, as far as I'm aware. Is that your understanding?
I'm a little foggy. I know Eric is working on the packages, so I'm not sure if those will go up just before the web cart launches for Adepticon Sunday, December 8th at 1 p.m. Central Time, I understand it. They are work in progress. They'll be up soon, and they won't give you the scenarios, but they'll give you the lay of the land. They'll explain, what the basic event is, the time, the date, and all of that important stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that may or may not be available, but basically just to recap real quick, Saga Thursday's Age of Magic singles. On Friday, we got the doubles, Age of Vikings. On Saturday, are we talking Age of Crusades?
Yes,
Saturday?
we are.
And that's a singles. And then on Sunday, we have the Age of Vikings once again in singles. So I've heard that we've got the Saga Hall once again, somehow, inexplicably. So that is amazing. And it's going to be a good time. So I encourage all of you to show up. I believe it will just be the teasers. But if the PDFs are up, they will have all the additional rules about mercs and stuff like that. So we won't get into that business at this time, since there's a lot of other goodies we can discuss. So down here, actually, you have the results from the UK Grand Melee. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I managed to not have that page up in front of me. I wasn't sure. I looked at it and I was like, I couldn't remember. Did we cover this last time? I don't think we did.
No, I don't believe so. So I've got Pagan Peoples, number 1, followed by Crusaders, Scots, Mutts, and Anglo-Danes, and they allowed both Age of Vikings and Age of Crusades warbands. And if you want the full report on that, you can check out the Northern Tempest podcast. So, and that reminded me, I haven't listened to that episode yet, so I'm going to check that out tomorrow at work.
Yep, I'm a little behind. I just want to make a quick note on it.
Sure.
I find this so fabulous that they allowed like the two universes to clash, and that we see such an interesting mix. Like, it'd be so easy, right? If either based on the boards or balance, you see like the first 5 spots are the same warband, or the first 4 spots are the same warband. Seeing such a nice mix back and forth between the universes, I really like that. That to me, again, just underlines and reinforces how balanced it is, and how you can grab up most any warband, and with a nice run, you can come out on top.
Yeah, that's really cool, actually. So we haven't really seen that for a while. So back in the Saga, the dark ages, first edition. So it just naturally, everybody got used to using everything. And then I think when the Crescent and Cross came out, people still did that, but then there was some, like, a little bit of pulling back, trying to separate them maybe. And then once the second edition came out, people were really universe strict, it seemed like, for the most part. But it's cool to see an event that is mixing it up. Yeah, and looks like a good mix of factions from both doing well. So that's really cool. Yeah. So definitely check that out. So moving on. So we've got to touch on some comments from last time, buddy. So lit off a real
what did you do, Rodge? What did you do
there? So yeah, so we're gonna jump off here. We'll start with the long thread here. We won't really get into it because there's a lot to touch on here, but so we had the in-depth discussion about withdrawals and casualty removal. So one thing I didn't think about, because we played this way for a long time and it hasn't come up, but some people would measure casualties, a unit being destroyed from every single model at the time. So if you killed a unit of 6 guys, you would measure from all 6 guys, versus the way that I was talking, you would do it from the last model, which is how I thought it was done according to the rule book. So Mark, I think maybe Vorthrax, Sean Moomy, they all piped in here, maybe some others as well, saying that they didn't play it that way. So I thought that was interesting. Now, did you post on the forum? Is that your username or is that somebody else?
I did. I am a pretty frequent poster on the forum, especially when you involve yourself in being a TO for Saga events. I always want to be right on the button. I mean, I want to be right on the button with my buddies too, right? But also running the event. So I actually, before showtime, before the big Adepticon, I kind of wade through the forum, make sure I have it all straight in my mind. And if I come up with stuff over the year, I'll pop it in there, and Duckett and the others will get on it right away. So I did. There had been, someone had raised this very question, this controversy back in July, and it had been quiet. There really hadn't been an official answer. It just kind of sat there. So I kind of threw it back up there one more time, and thanks to your show,
the divisiveness,
right? A lot of people jumped in there, and so Alex did weigh in and clarify that indeed it is from the last figure. And I didn't realize this was really a controversy because, like you're saying, I played it this way. My buddies played it this way. We go to Adepticon, and almost 40 people turn out. We're all, as far as I can see, right? The game's in front of me. The people asking, and every once in a while, when someone new isn't sure and they go to throw that fatigue on everyone, I'm like, oh no. Pick it from the last figure based on this, right?
Yeah. When you're pointing it out in their favor, they're like, oh, yeah,
exactly.
That does sound pretty good.
That's right. They're very happy, right? But I did not realize it was a controversy. And as it turns out, there was the UK way and maybe the Houston way and the Midwest way, but it's all sorted now.
Yeah, so it's been posted on the forum through a mediary, Ducat. How do you say that?
Correct. He's the right-hand man in the English-speaking forum for Alex. And so when we get sideways on a couple big things, he has the ability to ping him, text him, whatever it is, and just get him to kind of like weigh in and say, yes, this is how it's supposed to be.
So it's a step towards official. It's not in a FAQ or anything, so it'd probably just be a good idea to review with your opponent. Obviously, as long as you guys are on the same page, it doesn't really matter too much about the way that you play it. Now, I will. There's a couple reasons that I'll get into just real quickly on why that I think maybe it changed, because in the first edition you did measure from every single person, although it wasn't clear in that book, and it had to be clarified in a FAQ as well. So it's not surprising that people still decided to play it that way. But so the destruction bubble is a lot smaller if you do it that way, obviously. So you could think of it as a way to offset the additional destruction of being able to inflict fatigue with shooting by killing the last model with shooting. So in the first edition, that was limited to just purely melee casualty, wiping them out. So it got worse in that respect. So maybe you can dial it back to a smaller bubble to balance it out. The other reason I think is it kind of came up in the various threads, and people started. A couple of people call it the Rodge rule, so I thought that was infinitely amusing. So go ahead and refer it that way if you like. I think that is awesome. So it came up, but doing it the way that was described with the last model, there's a tactical decision there, and charging and what models you touch become important as well. So it adds like a layer of nuance there, which I think you got the gist of that in the video. And then the third idea was kind of how the change with moving in straight lines, because the saga sticks don't bend, right? So when you remove models, even though all the casualties are suffered at the same time, you physically don't generally remove them all at the same time. So there is going to be a last model, and so that's acknowledging a reality of just removing models from the table that, in a way, I think is kind of clever. So those are kind of the three kind of reasons I thought that may have been a deliberate change. But however you want to play it with your chums, definitely keep on doing that until a fact comes out, and then even if the fact comes out, you still don't have to do it. So
freedom of choice.
Okay, so that's enough about that. I find talking about rules online, Monty, not a great use of time or resources, I found.
Right.
So let's move on. So Vorthrax, he's chiming in. He's got a strategy about defeating Peter the Hermit. So this is kind of going to depend on your warband, but mainly if you can somehow get to Peter himself, a lot of the special rules revolve around him being alive. So he might be the weak spot there, but it did sound pretty hopeless based off the strategies. So the best tactic would be to not let your opponent use them, because he has to agree beforehand, right?
Exactly.
For the legendaries.
Exactly.
But
I would agree with that. I thought I did see a thread in Discord, and I think it might have been an Australian event where someone faced Peter the Hermit and said it was terrible. The turns, because of the self-perpetuating, they die and they feed the board and they die and they keep moving dice through it. The Peter the Hermit thing, he said the turns were like, 30, 35 minutes a piece, and the game just, first of all, they just destroy you in 3 turns, but you don't even play for all that long. So it's tough. It is tough.
Yeah.
And it will be FAQ'd and dealt with down the line. But in the meantime, like you said, the organizers could recognize it, or you and your buddies could just say, hey, let's both do this, or let's neither do this.
That sounds good to me. All right, moving on. Sean, he posted separately about the Warhands Roos models. So he liked those models. He thought they're a bit short. So if you go back and look at his comment, he actually extended all their legs on his model. So Sean, he's posted amazing jaw-dropping warbands on the Studio Tomahawk forum. So he posted another link to this Let Adventure forum where he has these Eastern Vikings models. So it was really quite inspiring for my little project here. He's using a lot of the same models that I picked up. So very useful thread there. I would check out his models for sure there. Teddy Ninja posts, hey Rodge, love the Q&A. He's been running Normans and Carolingians recently, and he's curious if you have any recommendations on history podcasts or other sources for learning about the Viking era. So you chimed in here. What did you have to say?
Yeah, so I think if you're a fan of podcasts and you're a fan of history, and you haven't tried it yet, you definitely should dial up Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Oh, yeah. He is masterful, and he has one particular, it's episode 41, Thor's Angels, which is, right? I think it rings in at 4.5 hours. So, it's great for long drives. It's great in little bites. It's great to paint to. And then I think there was another one, Mark Morris has a good audiobook I have queued up even on my computer here at home, The Norman Conquest, and that's I think 30 hours, because the whole book's broken out. So boy, you get every detail, and it's really good stuff. It really is kind of, to me, it's inspirational to paint and be able to have themed either a podcast or an audiobook that kind of touches on the subject. It just kind of gives me a little extra painting mojo and understanding, that kind of synchronicity between I'm painting this, I'm going to play it, and I'd also like to really understand the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I'm kind of like you. If I'm painting sci-fi models, I need a sci-fi audiobook. And if I'm doing the saga stuff, I need at least something in the fantasy genre, swords and shields. So I'm with you. Herkus Monty also pipes in. He's got, for podcasts, the Norman Centuries from Lars Brownworth.
Yep.
Tides History has a good post about the Roman Empire as well. So thank you for chiming in there, Herkus Monty. The original monkey cars. So we talked a little bit about I can't recall the scenario exactly last time. Hunting down the baggage, fellas. And so he just pointed out that note, the first player isn't always limited to 3 saga dice. It is scenario dependent. Some allow dice, but some limit the type of activations. So that's good to point out, because I was talking about just being the second player as far as having the last turn. And then you kind of jump to the 3 dice thing, which I think in that scenario it is 3 dice limited. But if you're using the Battle for Heroes cards or some of the other scenarios, it does mix it up. And I've seen comments about that on the Saga like Facebook group and stuff like that. So it's good to point out. Thanks for chiming in. Alan Wright, as far as painted models go, his local store has a 3 colors and a wash minimum paint job policy. Makes the tables look a lot better. I could not argue with that. If you can get the people down there, I guess. I don't know if there'd be many people playing in our shop if that was the policy. I'd have to bring both my war bands. So James Simpson, he posted no additional news on Age of Hannibal, and so you piped in that it's looking like 2020. So
yeah. We got that via someone screenshotting a text message.
Yeah, somebody texted him. So.
A little worrisome, right? Invasive tech.
Absolutely. Lawrence Bateman, congrats to Keith. Nice looking figs. To answer our question, so Lawrence had some figures in the paint contest as well, and he said that his luxurious fur was teddy bear fur. It's not an original idea, but he got the idea from some other YouTubers to use it as a terrain mat. So it looks really cool.
It does.
And he says he actually does use it for gaming. I was curious, how thick, if you could play on it. Yeah. He said they use it for gaming, but it could be trimmed down a little bit more from what we saw in the photos.
Okay.
All right. So we've got a lot of congratulatory comments from Old Fox, Keith. Herkus Monty, congrats to Keith and Lawrence. Anyone painting horses for a competition should get an award. So
that extra lift.
All right, last comment here before we move on. This one is very recent, from just a couple days ago, so you may not have seen it there, buddy. But Elliot Treibenbacher says, great video as always. I was wondering the other day if you and Monty, or just you, would be interested in doing a Saga Fundamentals mini-series. Saga Dice Economy, Fatigue Management, and Combat Math are all vital parts of the game, but new players are often left to fend for themselves because there aren't a lot of resources about the mathematical aspects of the game. So I think that is a great idea, and that's kind of what we're doing here, kind of tackling really specific areas of the game. Like we did last time, about withdrawals, casualties. We're going to talk about terrain this time. Forgot to say the main topic at the beginning, but that's what we're going to be doing a little later. And so I think we could definitely continue that series. And these are all really good ideas for topics. So Saga Dice Economy, Fatigue Management, I think is a big one. And then the Combat Math. So I would love to tackle those, buddy. Add that to the note sheet, the to-do list.
Consider it done.
All right. Should I make some typing noise? I don't know.
Right.
Oops. I hit something. We're fine.
Did a little 10 key.
Okay. So thank you for everyone for the comments, and definitely post below on this video if you'd like us to chat about whatever your question is. So we're done with the Q&A. We're going on to hobby progress here. So have you been busy, buddy? You been up to something?
I have. I finished the Crusader warband, the Prairie Crusader warband. They are all painted. They look nice, very happy. Like, I got to tell you, when you get to the finish line, every project, like you're in the beginning and you're like, oh, it's a slog. And even painting for a while, you're like, oh man, you feel like you're teetering on a knife's edge. And then at some point, all of a sudden, it starts coming together. They look good. And like for me, it's pretty close to the finish line, right? It just is. And I get those, get those shields white, get those transfers in, paint them in, and then weather them from the bottom up. And then you just kind of sit back. You're like, yeah, that's what you were hoping for, right? That's hopefully the feeling you have. I need to matte spray them and take some pictures, I also like have had to, like this last month, go kind of heavy in another gaming field. I had no bolt action army, so I needed to paint up some a Soviet naval platoon. So
Cool.
but that's almost done. So it'll be back to some Saga painting after this.
Cool. So I saw that. So those were Soviet sailors.
Yeah. So, like as you do this thing, I have a buddy, he has a great saying, and he's like, life is too short to paint bad figures. And so it turns out there's a kind of awesome collection of like World War II Soviet naval. These are guys who were serving on ships, and the Soviet army goes, hey, we need more guys. You guys off the boats, you get rifles, right?
Yeah.
And they just look awesome. They got their little sailor hats with the little, tails, and, they're running around like, right off the boats.
They looked really cool. I was like, who are these guys?
Right? It's just different. It's very themey. It may not be the best bolt action army, but I want one that looks good, and they were great figures. A lot of fun to paint. So
cool. So bang those guys out.
Oh yeah. It's a little easier when they're all wearing uniforms. You get a certain system going.
Yeah,
and
baby. That was the idea with my Romans. So
right.
Work well. Cool. So you're just about done with the Crusaders. Are you taking a little break here for the holidays? Do you have the next project in mind, or?
Yeah. So I need to backfill my Welsh. I moved almost all of them except for my mounted Welsh, so I need to buff out the mounted side and some of the foot. So that'll be like over Christmas break. And then Christmas, I have some time off, but it's like my son flies in and I get to see him so rarely. It's a lot of family games and stuff. I kind of have to slow down the painting machine here. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you got to slow it down every once in a while just so you can gear it back up, baby.
That's right.
Cool.
How about yourself, Rodge? What are you working on?
Well, I was pretty busy this month, so I got all my heathens assembled. I bit off the big chunk that's going to be the first war band. So 2 units of levy and 24 warriors, and then the warlord, and then basically another warlord that I can use as a champion. So that's going to be the first painted batch here. So I basically usually do a test model, but I just jumped right in for some reason. I was really rearing to go. Right. So everything was primed, did a zenithal, and then I jumped to the levy. So these guys aren't as fancy or whatever as the warrior. So if they don't turn out as good, it's okay.
Yeah.
So those guys are just about completely base coated, and if you've been following the YouTube comments or community page, you can see some in progress pics, and I'm sure I'll be posting pics below here. But I'm starting with some really strong, vibrant colors with these guys, and maybe my green was a little too vibrant. I had to tone it down, so I did go back, and so I just really want to do some bright colors. So my Anglo-Saxons, I like them, but once I got them out on the table, I thought they were kind of dull, like the different browns and grays and colors that I used were all too similar to each other, and they were all too dark and desaturated. So I'm going the opposite route here.
I like it.
If it gets out of hand, so I'm going to use airbrush shading and washes to kind of tone it back down, and so I could really tone it down, or I could leave it kind of bright. So I'm not sure where I'm going to end up yet in that spectrum, but they're just about rearing to go. They're all base coated. I got the little leather strips and the belts, and everything's rip rearing, ready to go. So hopefully in December here, I can get some of those guys actually finished here.
Awesome.
Other than that, so our topic this time is terrain. So this was my inspiration to finish off my ruins and my rocky ground. So those were the last two pieces missing from my collection. So as we talk about the terrain, I'll just be showing photos of my own personal terrain that I built earlier this summer, and turned out decent. But there was a little month or two gap, because once I went to Scandinavia, once I got back, I was like, I want to paint some Vikings now. I'm done with this terrain. But you got me back on, buddy. So Thank you for that. And I want to give a shout out to Warstein Studios. So you'll see my ruins are 3D printed, kind of cool ruins. So those are found on Thingiverse, which is like a 3D terrain file website. They have everything on there. But Warstein can print it for you. So he's a buddy of mine. So I'm going to post a link to his stuff below. So if you like what you see, he can print out a copy for you. Excellent. Using his fancy 3D printer technology. So, yeah, hobby progress has been pretty good, pretty steady. We'll see how it holds up during the holidays here. But have you been getting any games in? So you had your bolt action there. That took a lot of points, I'm sure.
Yep. There was a bolt action event, and it is a stellar. I mean, the terrain they put on for this thing is just top shelf. Lit city lights light up on one of the ruined rubble boards. So I had to do a little bit of bolt action training up. I hadn't played in forever. Didn't want to walk to an event and get spanked, which happens, right? If you don't prepare a little bit. So my saga starts later this week, and I get back on the saga train.
Oh, wow. So no games that you can recall?
0. That's shocking.
Oh, wow. That is shocking. Well, okay. Well, I was going to speed over my games, but maybe I'll probably still speed. I'll speed over them. Well, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how I digress here. But I did get in a few different games here. So I played another game against Jeremy with his Norse-gaels, and we talked a little bit about the Hearthguard there. And you should try the 4-packs, but he's stuck with the 8, and didn't work for him too good there. So he got hit with the Berserker Bomb, those guys. So and we had a really good conversation after the game about what he should have done differently, because there is a powerful ability that would entice you to use an 8-pack of Hearthguard, which is the ability that if you win a melee, you cannot be engaged on the following turn. So your whole strategy could be about that 8-man wrecking crew pounding face and then being, immune to retribution in some ways on the following turn, depending on their shooting and stuff like that. So we kind of talked about that, and then we talked about if you're playing the Vikings and they have Berserkers, and you have 8 Hearthguard, and you usually run 8 Hearthguard, should you split them off, even if that's not what you normally do? So do you have thoughts about that, Monty? Is that
I do,
something you think about?
I think that's a decent response, and I don't think the Norse-gael board really punishes you for having 4 packs of Hearthguard.
Yeah, so specifically with the Norse-gaels, we decided there was no downside really to doing that. Where with some other boards there may be, but just having that 8-man unit is a really big liability if you can't get a handle on the Berserkers.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we came up with. So maybe somebody at home here can glean some knowledge and think about that next time they're sitting down next to the Vikings. If you don't have a good way to handle the Berserkers, if you play an experienced player, they're just going to... I hold them back. The more you hold back, the more power they hold. So, and the way that I'd play them against that 8-man Hearthguard, I'll trade them every time. You have to. It's too good. Maybe there's a scenario reason you wouldn't. But if there is no 8-pack of Hearthguard, it gets a little harder there to figure out how you're going to get the value out of these guys. And there's actually ways. You could play them defensively, going up against exhausted units, using their fatigue to take them up, because just Uller, with rerolls, 16 attacks, you can dish out a lot of damage and potentially have them survive. So I would probably play a little differently, I think, if I was going up against more warriors or something like that. It really depends. Have you played as the Vikings?
Once or twice, and they were kind of tough matchups, the particular ones I had. But to your point about like that 8-pack of Hearthguard, it is not uncommon in Saga for people to like put together an 8-pack. And my buddies, much like I think your buddies are learning, when I run my Norse-gael, if they normally put 8, after I smash their 8 with 1 attack and take every figure off the table, and I do that more than once, pretty soon they're splitting their units smaller and smaller. Like they look at my configuration it's going on the table like, those 4-packs are coming out. So I want to make sure all my, I'm not going to have a 12-pack of warriors. It'll be a 7 or 8-pack, or maybe even a 6-pack, right? They play around with those numbers. That's like the game within the game as you're deploying at the table. But it is fascinating, like what you pick up, because when I play the Vikings, I know when I see the berserkers, they're going to come hunting, and they're going to come hunting for my warlord at a minimum, but they'd really like to grab 2 for 1, go smash an 8-pack of Hearthguard. So whatever I play against them, I would right away, like if I'm playing the Welsh and I like to have an 8-pack of Hearthguard for shooting, if I set up and I'm against the Vikings, I see they have berserkers, I'm like, right away I'm going to split them, even though it's going to flatten my shooting, along with I think it is the Odin ability. I just right away I'm going to do that mental calculation and try to get my units a little smaller, because you guys are so good at smashing things.
So a lot of good points here about the game within the game. So just splitting your units, it denies the Viking player that big juicy target, but using the 4 packs of Hearthguard is pretty difficult to, they're so fragile, and again, like we said, depending on the board, so it might just be a win in and of itself if they decide to do that, or limit their warrior packs. And then on the flip side, if you can get inside the mind of that Viking berserker, if you could lure him in somehow, if you could set up a tasty trap for those berserkers, if you can get off all the abilities, there isn't a lot that can withstand that.
No, you can't make that many saves.
The Scots maybe, but that's about it.
That's the exception of the rule. Oh my gosh, with a full battle board. But if you see a full battle board, you also might look at it and say, okay, I'm going to do nothing. Let's see what you do.
They can do it, but they have to match you all your battle board abilities versus all his abilities. It probably should balance out, but so it ended up being a win for the Vikings there. Had a lot of depleted units at the end, but came through on top after that. And next week I played against Zach. So if you listen to the last episodes, I've been playing my Vikings versus Yams a few different times. So I wanted to mix it up. So I pulled out the Anglo-Danes board and got those guys going again. So it was pretty fun to use those guys. Been a long time, and that's kind of what sparked my post on the Saga Facebook group about how do people run their Anglo-Danes, and it generated some good discussion there. So that game was pretty good. It was interesting after playing so much Saga, because that was probably like my first warband that I used, in first edition and second edition, and I was always about the +1 armor ability. And I'm like, oh yeah, armor 5 to 6, that's good. And then when I was looking at the board this time, I'm like, oh yeah, obviously it's like rocks, which is reroll defense dice. And then you have 2 other abilities that get you loads more defense dice. And if you do that, you're kind of invulnerable. So I just put the Hearthguard with the Dane axes, ran forward, smash and face, and with rerolling block dice and having a bunch of extra block dice, I was able to, basically keep them intact through multiple combats at full strength and kind of beat up on these Yams. So it was pretty fun. And I'm thinking, if I was going to play them, I want to add a levy unit, because I really think you need some shooters to keep the Cav guys honest. And this is kind of our post-game discussion. Against the Yams, it didn't matter too much, but I'm starting to think that levy, even if there aren't really any battle board abilities, if you can add shooting, that's good. And the levies are just good. They're just good on their own. They're not bad. They just have so many bodies. Yes. And if somebody engages with them, it can kind of be a trap. You can use the defensive abilities on the Dane board to... it's like that game that we had in Age of Magic where I'm like, I'm going to wipe out these levies and get on with it. And used all the defense abilities, and I killed one, and you wiped out my creature unit, if I recall correctly.
I do remember that. A bright spot.
So definitely, I'm thinking it. I do have some Viking archers as part of my Heathens project, so I might just mix those guys in to that other army warband and run them or something like that. So I'm actually thinking about running them at our little tournament this weekend.
Oh wow!
Running the Danes, because my Vikings, I don't have a problem running unpainted models, but they're like work in progress. They're on the paint shelf. I don't want to pack them up and move them. So I'm thinking I might use anglo-danes, and then we could take a merc unit. Now, people were talking about merc units as part of that Anglo-Danish warband discussion, and so I'm going to take a unit of vagrant warriors, Monty. Have you run into these guys?
No, but I remember, I'd have to go back. I know there's a little FAQ in there, so I have to double check on it, but interesting synergy with the Anglo-Danes, right?
Yeah, so I think they'll work really well. The more fatigue the enemy has, the better they do. So that's what the Danes are all about.
Yep. Oh.
And then actually, as they get fatigued themselves, they get better as well. That's more attack and defense dice. So I think these guys will work out really good. They'll give me some range, I think. So this is just based off the models that I have. So I don't have any painted archers. I don't want to use unpainted guys with painted guys. I'll add these guys in, and then I could do multiple moves if I need to catch cavalry or something. They'll arrive there fatigued, but that'll help. That'll help out. They'll get a bunch of extra attack and defense dice. Where the other Anglo-Dane units and the battle board doesn't really work too well trying to run across the board. So this will at least give me something. So that's my idea.
I like it.
We'll see if I follow through with it.
Yeah, I want to hear about it. They don't get a lot of love. So interesting. Good to hear that, and makes me want to go pick up that board and give it a spin too now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Moving on. So the next week I was up against Zach again. So I didn't want to use the Danes again. So I broke out the Romans. And I've been kind of poo-pooing the Romans since me and Hamza had our battle board discussion about them. They've been facts since, but since then we really talked about how they need mercenary units to really kind of compete. And so I took them with the Flemish, our favorite guys there. Had those guys right in the middle of the board. I had two pieces of terrain on either side, a swamp and a rocky ground. So we'll talk about our terrain strategies going forward. But I had a nice little wall of no going through to get at my shooters. So it worked out really well. So obviously they've been fact to move just once and short. So that's a big restriction, but they're really solid. And you can use abilities to redirect shots and charges on the Roman battle board. So that's really useful with those guys, because otherwise you don't even really use those abilities because you don't want them to shoot or charge anything. So redirecting it doesn't really help you that much. But yeah, they worked out really, really well. They were fun to use. They work out well with the board for those abilities. And then also because, a lot of the abilities are dependent on your units and what's going on. And so like a lot of times I just had extra dice to put in the combat pool. So that is also good for merc units. If you're going to be taking them, because they can reroll block dice, so you get more bang for your buck there.
Yeah.
And then that also does show if the board is kind of weak, if you're consistently putting stuff in the combat pool, because that's like your best option. I think that tells you something right there. So
it does.
But good game against the Yams. I have a pretty good streak against Zach there, so that was another victory. But the streak was broken, Monty. So people have been listening to me talk about my wins for so many months now, but it's finally come to an end. I played a demo game against a local, trying to get him into it, and it went well. He played the Vikings, and I played my Romans, and it was 4 points that we were playing. And I did not really have to try too hard to throw the game. So my Hearthguard wiped out right away. I just killed a warrior when I charged in. And so I was actually trying to trying to win by the end, and it just wasn't working for me. But it ended perfectly, though. He ended the game using Valhalla, and then every unit charged, like every unit, and everybody suicided everybody, kind of. And so all that was left was I had one archer, and then he had his warlord who was exhausted. So it was a perfect way to end the demo game. So
that's awesome.
And I think
I think you got a new convert there. That's the
kind of game he was asking next Friday. What's up, guys?
Awesome.
Let's get it on. So
good job, Rodge.
Yeah, those were my games. Hopefully, enjoyed listening about those. But I think we're going to move on to our main topic here, which is terrain, buddy.
Yep. Yeah.
So Saga is interesting with terrain because setting up the board is generally part of the scenario, not all scenarios necessarily, or maybe all of them. I haven't gone through and double checked all that. But setting up the board is part of the game, and oftentimes you will have a lot of control over that terrain, where it goes, and the terrain pieces, and you can build your army and your plan around this. Now, in some armies, it's very obvious, like the Irish are trying to get uneven terrain pieces throughout your deployment zone and such.
Everywhere.
But even, I think every warband, you know, if you think about it, you'll kind of come up with the best thing for you. So I would encourage you to really think that over next time, because for a long time, I would just grab whatever and throw it down. And if you do that, I think that's perfectly fine too. Don't you, Monty?
Yeah.
But if you're playing at tournaments, now a lot of times tournament terrain is fixed just for time purposes, because it can add an extra 5 or 10 minutes. But I encourage you to think about your army, and hopefully we'll talk about some good stuff here that'll get the juices flowing. So I guess, Monty, do you have a go-to piece of terrain or a board setup or anything like that? Like let's say you're norse-gaels, because that's what you've been playing most recently.
Yes.
So is there some terrain you're going to reach to? If you're first player, you're going to set out this fresh board. Just
exactly
some general thoughts. We'll get into the really specific terrain strategies, but just kind of some general ideas here, maybe.
Yep, it's a fascinating topic, and it's one I think all my buddies would agree with. Ever since version 2, I am head over heels over marshes, and I typically, like, my first piece will often be, like, if I'm not trying to do terrain denial, like if my opponent has Irish or he's gonna, I know he likes to bundle up his levy in some terrain. If I'm not going to grab a hill to try to do terrain denial, I will grab the marsh, and then if my buddy doesn't grab it, then I'll grab the second marsh. And what I'm really doing with these things is like a couple things. I kind of can create a little bit of a funnel thing, getting them out on the left and right flank. Or if I know, like, my buddy likes to maneuver and he's player 1, if I drop that in his backfield, like maybe as all mounted or mostly mounted, you drop in his backfield like this, and now you cut off his ability to do a shift, right? So you really, I don't know, there's just a lot of possibilities with that thing. People don't almost never go into it, so you're really creating channels, you're creating pockets, you're really shaping the battlefield with those swamps. Plus, they just look kind of cool. I don't know, that's me. So my favorite, like right out of the box, more than rocky ground, more than ruins, is the 2 marshes. How about yourself, Rodge?
Well, yeah, so that raises some good points there. So just setting a piece of terrain somewhere in the middle-ish. A lot of times you don't have the deployment zones exactly laid out, but you kind of know where you're going to be. So just putting it like about 6 to 8 inches, 10 inches from the edge. If they're infantry-based army, it's really going to take a lot of orders to go around those edges, like you said. So having one of those on each side really does make the battlefield like a 24-inch wide bubble. Now, if they have cavalry, that's a lot less effective. So I'm kind of thinking about, you got infantry, cavalry and kind of shooting are like kind of the three paradigms here. So that kind of really influences what you're trying to do here. So I don't really have, despite what I've said, I don't really have a set plan, and I'm trying to come up with one. What I've found with the Romans is I always did woods. There's always plenty of woods or fields just to get the shooters in. So if you have shooters, you want to, especially javelins, because you can get within medium and they cannot necessarily charge you. If they're over a short away, there's that sweet spot. So I always did woods and rocky ground in the middle. And that's kind of a problem because if they get to it first or they just get into it, then they're getting the benefits of the hardcover or the soft cover. So I've shied away from that. I've gone to the marshes with the Romans here because I can throw my levies into the marshes. I don't care if they get fatigued or not. And it's just, if they go in there to kill them, that's perfect. They're taking extra fatigues. And then if they get in there, there's no benefit for cover being in the marshes. So that's the main thing. They can't take it away from me. So that's kind of my modus operandi with the Romans and my shooting is very similar to you. With the Vikings, I'm trying to get. I'm not sure here. I'm trying to get some pieces in the middle, just something to work with my Viking levy guys. So I haven't committed to the marshes with them because these are big units and I want to fight with them sometimes. So I'm not willing to penalize myself in that way. It's not that important. So I've been doing the rocky grounds and the forest there, but. So that's kind of what I've been doing lately. But let's get into the terrain table here. And we'll just go down maybe each one of these. Now, the first one up here is fields or scrubland. So this is low, uneven, light cover. You can have up to 2. Now, the beauty of these is that you can have a large one. So you can have a small or a large. So I encourage you, if depending on your terrain collection, to really take a look at it and see if you actually have the really large, because you can have some really basically a tile for your field is a legal, a gigantic square. So we have some of those pieces. So I would encourage folks to have those bases, the really big and then the smaller, and kind of running the gamut, because the game is meant to use those. And so like Adepticon, it doesn't really have very big pieces as far as my memory serves me. So that was made mostly in first edition. I don't know what the parameters were, if any, back then, but it's a very different game if you're using these big pieces. And if you're not used to those big pieces, they can really throw you for a loop because they're just so big. It could take like 4 moves for a unit of infantry to get across from it.
But to your very point, Rodge, absolutely. I mean, I know like people have to they game where they are, budget, talent, time to make terrain. But the more of these different classes of terrain you can either buy, have a buddy make, or make yourself, have a set, share a set. I think the richer it makes the game, because for example, you throw out their mounted. You walk up to the table. I'm playing my buddy. He's playing all mounted horde, and all my guys are on foot. So guess what I want to do? I want the biggest piece of field, that football field, and I drop it on one flank, and then I want the biggest hill, and I'm going to call it a steep hill to make it uneven and shut down the other flank. And right away, we've taken the board and we've trimmed off the flanks and we've channeled it so that he just can't ride circles around me like, the Mongols of old, right? So that's part of using the terrain more than just plopping it down like this looks nice or just adding the aesthetics, it's trained with a purpose.
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. So we all know that mounted troops, it's often just better to be mounted despite the drawback. So having the big pieces of terrain, I think, can really even that up. if you have a big disparity between the cavalry and the foot slogger players. So to get back to the fields or scrubland, so basically this is just a forest, but it doesn't block line of sight. You could shoot over it. So the high and the low, if we just want to touch on that now. So that's not really a big, it's not really a big factor in Saga, because you have to block line of sight, you have to go through both, lines of the template there. And so, these big pieces, a big forest, the range of the weapons isn't long enough to even shoot through it. So even the smaller pieces, like the ruins or forest or something like that, oftentimes you're not even shooting far enough to have that really matter. But I like the fields for the shooting armies regardless. So this does open up, if we're talking about Age of Magic, the War Machine ranges are infinite. In ATS and Arthur, I don't know what the range is on the ballista, but with those weapons, this high and low actually does matter quite a bit. So
absolutely.
In the Great Kingdoms, or if we're getting into those factions with these war machines, I would feel I like the scrublands, because you can slow them down, park your guys in there, you get your shooting cover, and then you can still shoot over it with your war machines with no problem. So that's the kind of the big difference there is Age of Magic over whether I'm going to choose this piece or not. So if I got a war machine, I'm going to choose it. If not, I'll probably opt for a forest, or if I'm just looking for a really big piece of terrain. So you are limited in those big honking pieces. So that would be a big decider for me, whether I'm going to choose this piece or not. So do you guys have all the terrain options at your store?
So I bring all terrain options, like specifically made for Saga, and there is Warhammer terrain off the shelf you can grab. You can use it in a pinch. Nobody gets too stressed out about it. But generally, when we set up and meet up, one person, if they have a terrain collection, they'll bring it out, and I make sure I have all the options. Right? That's the point. So my friend, my opponent, can kind of rustle through the box and pick out small or large pieces, and so yeah. That's helpful. But Fantasy Flight Games is very much sci-fi oriented, so the terrain there is mostly that too.
Cool. Well, yeah, one thing from a modeling perspective, doing the fields, so I don't think you can see my photo, but I just have the field, the plowed rows, basically, just so you can move figures on it. But I think with the field, it's important to have like some fences, or I've got these 3-dimensional like hay piles or whatever, just to, like, when you're looking at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's like cover. That's the only thing from a modeling perspective. We'll get into that a little later on another terrain piece, but just mentally when you look at it, that both of you realize that you have light cover when you're shooting at it by having something like that would actually offer cover, I think is useful for that piece of terrain. Right. But next up, I think, is a more widely utilized piece of terrain. It's the good old hill. You can have one large hill. Now it's high, open, and no cover. So we talked about the low and the high thing, and it's not really a big deal. You kind of touched on it a little earlier, but this is the big denial piece, essentially.
Yes.
You put this in the middle because you don't want to deal with any of that BS. Guys shooting from the woods. This clears out. If you've got a nice large, they can't put anything within 4 inches of that. So you've got a nice 20-inch diameter bubble here of open ground. So that didn't really come to me right away. Someone had to tell me that at one point. So I'm just spreading that out. I'm like, oh, that makes sense why you would do that. So oftentimes I will start the game if I'm up against the Lords of the Wild or the Irish one of those
Yes.
more, some factions are more obvious about what they're trying to do to you. And the hill will keep them honest in the middle, maybe slightly towards your own, to give your deployment guys a little lane there to get across. The hill, Monty. Anything you want to say about the good old hill?
So I just want to sneak this in. So for the longest time, there is the, I'm jumping ahead, but I'm trying to blend two things.
Mm-hmm.
There is the steep hill, and because I never really had like a great terrain piece, I have a small steepish thing, but I mean, you put figures on it and they tip off, so I tend to not use it, and I just never played steep hill. And then one day I was again playing my buddy's all-mounted army with my all-foot, and it occurred to me, I'm like, I have a hill, this big giant pancake hill that like you can put figures on, and I'm like, I made up a little token that just says the word steep, and I drop the hill out, and then I drop the word steep, and I go, that is a steep hill. And you don't have to it doesn't have to look like the Alps, right? I mean, you have to actually be able to put figures on it, and you don't want them to tip off and, lose a spear or whatever. And it's huge, since it's like you said, like if you're playing against mounted, you've created what is probably, this very big no-go zone, because each time mounted ends their movement in uneven, they pick up a fatigue and you don't. So they'll probably stay out of that.
So, we can get into this steep hill right now, I think.
Sorry, snuck ahead on that.
No, absolutely. So it
just took me a while to figure that out. I have a giant hill. Why was I not using it and just saying, hey, it's a steep hill today?
Yeah, so you hit on a couple points that I wanted to touch on perfectly. So the steep hill, I never knew this existed for a long time, because nobody at Adepticon, I don't think there's a piece for it, unless you guys agreed to it. And then in our personal terrain collection, we never had one. And then finally, I was playing a game, and then Jeremy's like, oh yeah, this is going to be a steep hill. I'm like, a steep hill? What's that? And I'm like, oh yeah, there is a thing called a steep hill. So if you can see, there's going to be a picture below of what I'm using. So I'm using, a big base, and then for the hill are essentially smaller, little hill lumps, essentially. So they'd be perfect for 6mm combat or something, but they look fine for our Saga stuff. And then so I kind of have lower ones for the regular hill, and then higher ones for the steep. But at this point, just having them there, they kind of just get in the way. So I'm just using the blank pancake, and I was gonna make some tokens that just said hill and steep hill. So representing a steep hill is hard, because we talked about the field, and you want to have some fences or crops or something on there to show that it's light cover. The steep hill is tougher because you want it to be playable. The most easiest thing to do is kind of raise it up on some rocks or rocky ground or something like that. But then you're kind of confusing it, because you're thinking it might be hard cover or something like that. So I don't know, I'm kind of anal retentive about that stuff, and I will forget and think that it's hard cover at some point in the game. So that's why this is on my mind first and foremost. But the steep hill is that's completely killer for the Cav armies there. So it's definitely in my repertoire now of giant terrain pieces.
I'd like to pitch it in for just another approach too. I mentioned mounted, but there have been a couple times I've used it, and maybe you should ask your buddies to jump out. I've used it when I'm playing the Vikings or Jom's Vikings, when I'm worried about my opponent's ability to hustle across the table and just smash my face. And so the Joms, with their ability to multi-activate and then multi-activate again with that upper right-hand ability, I think it's on an uncommon, you move 3 units on one uncommon die. And the Vikings, just their ability to gain fatigue and then shed fatigue so quick. I one time in an event, I had my Welsh out, and I was worried, right, because the Vikings were going to shut down my shooting with Odin, and they were going to hustle, and they were going to just smash me. So I put a steep hill right out in the middle, and I was kind of fortunate. My opponent didn't like that, so he put half his warband on one side of the steep hill and half on the other. And because I'm the Welsh, I think I had first go, so I maneuvered like
Ooh.
away and sent
Yeah.
almost all my army against one side and like beat them up without using too much shooting, and then like came around and dealt with the second half. So there's some interesting approaches. It's annoying. I mean, I understand like you want to get across the table quick, but if you're super speedy and I'm not, and I really think you can just, table me with that, the steep hill might be a way to just like put that in the middle and slow them down a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, great example of using the terrain to your advantage. I just want to point out, too, that for maneuvers, you cannot be in terrain here. So, I'm looking it up. If it's just uneven terrain or an open terrain. So, you can maneuver over a hill, just a regular hill, but a steep hill or
Correct.
the other bits of terrain here. That can be really big if somebody... Yeah, I've done it like accidentally put a unit in the woods, and I'm like, oh,
right.
Now I have to spend the Saga dice to move these guys when I was counting on a maneuver for free. So just putting that stuff kind of in their deployment zone isn't a bad strategy either for slowing them down. So like in your example, you swing around using a maneuver because you're on the open on your side, and then now he's got to bring it back around. So he can't maneuver for free through the hill. He has to go around, so he doesn't have any good options. He's got to spend dice to get his guys back over, or go around for free, but going around the long way, which getting in a maneuver battle with the Welsh doesn't sound sound good to me, I have to say.
If there's one thing the Welsh can do, they'll move in their turn, and then they're going to move again in your turn. So they're very slippery. They're like water bugs.
Absolutely. So next on the list there, we've got the marsh or fen.
Yep.
Your favorite. You touched on it earlier. You can have two of these babies. They are small. Mine are quite small. You can get them up to 8-inch square. I just got wee ones for whatever reason, but that's what I'm working with. You want to talk a little bit about these guys, how you use them? Will you go into the marsh?
Yep. So I generally don't go in the marsh. I mean, it's a little tricky depending on the size and the angle. Every once in a while, I get too clever. Like if I get into a marsh and if every figure can't like on the next move get out on a move of 4, if one of them is somehow tagging along, I'm going to get too fatigued getting out of the marsh. And I don't know that I've done that before, but you have to be careful. Once you're in, you want to get everybody out on the next move, and to make that move, it sometimes means you end up in a weird wonky formation trying to get out of the swamp. What I tend to do, and this goes back to your maneuver thing, I really do, like, especially if I'm the first player, I want to maneuver. I would like to see your layout, and if your levy are on your right flank, then I would like to take my free move and shift to the left and not walk right into the beaten zone of your levy shooters and hit you on the other flank. And if you do it just right, I've seen whole battles develop where you use that maneuver, you get away from the shooting unit, and the fight's away from the shooting unit, and there's so many, they're feeding all their dice into the battle, and the levy are sitting out there, and there have been times where the game ends, the levy unit doesn't even shoot once because they kind of get lost, they get neglected, and that's taking the battle away from them. So I tend to try to avoid putting my units in terrain to start the game, because generally, we're meeting in the middle. I mean, I generally can't, just sit back and I'm like, okay, you move your whole army at me and I'm moving no one. That generally isn't how it's going to go, right? So I like to not be in terrain, and what I'm using with my swamp is the swamp is like a little bit of a shield. Since I deploy them about, let's say, 5 or 6 inches forward on my flanks from my deployment zone, then my levy shooters, let's say I have 1 or 2 units, I can move them up behind the swamp and then have a fighting unit to the left and right of them, and they're in a little pocket there. They're behind the safety of the swamp. Anyone who wants to come at them has to probably make a double move and pick up 2 fatigue. So generally, they're back there. I've moved them forward. Their shooting zone has now been advanced, and they have someone protecting them on the left and the right. So it's a nice little bubble, that swamp, that marsh.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to touch on a point there you made earlier, which is about getting the fatigue in the dangerous grounds. This is.
Yep, that's
I
right.
don't have the chart here. I flipped to a different page, but it is the only dangerous piece of terrain, right? I'm just looking at it right now. So that can be important for certain saga abilities because dangerous has been ruled not to be uneven, although it suffers the same movement penalty. You get the fatigue for ending your movement in the terrain piece. So you can deploy in the swamp. I've done that from time. That's a great place for like a wizard or archers or War Machine for Age of Magic. Not too shabby. If you never activate for a movement, you will never get the fatigue. You can cut the corners of the swamp. If you're a unit, it's going to be tough not to end in the swamp, having somebody, like if you're charging over a corner of the swamp. But if you're a single model, now your movement's going to be reduced to short, but you can essentially move through the swamp as long as you don't end in it. You won't get the fatigue. So there could be, somebody might think they're safe when they're not. If you can just cut the corners, depending how sharp those corners are in your swamp. Mine are pretty soft, rounded, so they're not gonna have much play there. But so that's a good point, I think, for people to realize there. I think with the swamp too, what kind of options your board has for fatigue management, I think, could open up some options. And now as we're talking, I was saying I didn't favor the swamp with my Vikings and my levy, but now I'm thinking about it. I've got a couple different ways. So I can move into the swamp with the levy, and there's an ability that if I'm charged, I can remove a fatigue. So, that's an option there. Yeah. That might work really well. So maybe I will get the swamp out next time there, buddy.
There we go. And you reminded me the game within the game. You're playing the Irish, and they want to put down uneven terrain all across the board. And in your turn, you don't want to put any uneven down. So you put down the hill, and then you put down the hill, and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I put down next? You put down the swamp because it is dangerous terrain, and the FAQ made clear that dangerous is not uneven, and that the Irish can't shoot out of it. That all their benefits that say uneven, they don't work for dangerous. So that's your friend. If you're playing your Irish buddy and he's shooting you up, remember that after you grab that hill, your next two picks, your next two best picks are the marshes.
Yeah, so I think playing Age of Magic with Lords of the Wild or against is going to really drill all this into you. The sizes because of their abilities, and then the dangerous uneven because of the abilities is going to make you learn all this right quick. Because I've been staying away from a piece of terrain, and then I'm like, oh, that can't transform because it's too big. Or I'm like, oh yeah, that's the swamp. I don't care about the swamp. So
exactly.
Good point there. So I want to talk about the swamp a little bit more because let's talk about just moving into terrain. So you always want to, you never want to have just a person hanging out with some models in the piece and some hanging out unless there's a very specific reason, because basically you suffer the movement penalty getting in, you're going to suffer it going out, and your opponent won't if they can just touch a guy who's hanging out. This is also a problem because you won't be able to gain any cover benefits from having a guy out. But even though you could have a guy just touching a millimeter of a forest and hanging out 24 millimeters, he counts as being in there, but I just wouldn't recommend that. Just keep an eye out for that, because I've done that a bunch of times where I just had guys hanging out because, I'll get a little jump start on my next move if I have a couple guys hanging out. But there's no reason to do that unless you have some very specific reason, like you're going to do a double move immediately, or you need to stay next to a piece of terrain or something like that. So I just want to talk about that. And then specifically with the marsh, I think having a marsh nearby is great for combats as a place to retreat to. So have you done this, Monty? Does it? So similarly, if you're fighting cavalry or something, you can have your backup to a forest, because if you retreat, you can get into the forest.
Yep.
And then they sort of can't follow you. Now, the marsh is good because the move is not affected by terrain.
Correct.
When you withdraw. So you can withdraw into the marsh and you won't suffer the fatigue hit on essentially free. And then on your next, if it's your turn next, you can move out, because you can start in there, you're fine. And as long as you don't end in there, you can sort of get into the marsh. They don't want to follow up. Sometimes that's the best strategy. Is just hammer something multiple times. But if you're hanging out next to it, the last video we talked about the withdrawals, and you can really control where you go. So if you got your back up to a marsh, you can oftentimes get into there. They don't want to follow up, and then on your turn you can scooch out, and you sort of got a little freebie there because you didn't take the fatigue going in. So oftentimes that kind of play there could be really good. You put your levies out in front, get the shots, and then retreat into there, and then nobody's going to want to mess with those guys.
It's terrible in there.
So that's sort of an idea I've used a couple times. So
nice.
Keep that in mind. What else is on that list here? The rocky ground.
Yep.
People love it.
Right? People love rocky ground.
It's always out there.
Yep. It's probably, like next to the hill, the most popular choice because of the bonuses solid cover gives you in shooting and melee. If a unit is in rocky ground, I almost just don't even want to waste my time shooting. Now, I say that, and every once in a while people bend time and space and they get crazy and they actually are successful. But generally, if you're raising a unit's armor class up 1, they're harder to hit, and then they're saving on 3, 4, 5, and 6s. I mean, you're just looking at them to roll 1s and 2s, and they pick up all their dice, they roll them, there's no 1s and 2s. You're like, that was a wasted saga die. Why did I bother?
Yeah, the rocky ground, it's good. It
is
unassailable fortress. It can seem like that. So
yes,
I think people get maybe carried away with the rocky ground by putting it in their deployment zone for their archers. Now, this has happened so many times where I'm like, great. Well, I'm not getting within 12 inches of that.
No,
and often that levy unit will just sit there then the entire game. So if you're going to play with the rocky ground, I think put it forward a little bit. If you want to shoot from it, make sure it's within the the middle of the board. You really got some range. You have to move into it. It's a great place to fight from. You just can't count on your opponent coming at you necessarily. You can think of so many battle board abilities that are like, ooh, this is much better with blocking on 4s. But you want them to come in, but be prepared if they don't, because it does end up being a repulsion bubble as far as shooters go, which might work into your plan, might not, but be ready to pop out if so. And then the ruins is the same version, so make sure you got both if you want to double your solid cover. They're high versus low, so it's a smaller piece, so maybe that could come into play from time to time, but they're pretty interchangeable.
And I would throw out that, like, if your opponent pulls rocky ground, ruins is not a bad counter because it is high. And so, like, they put their rocky ground down, and you are going to guess, like, let's say they have levy slingers, levy archers, then 4 inches and a touch, drop the ruins right in front of it, and then know that you've, like, kind of broken up their line of sight. Like, especially if they're, especially with a 12-inch range, right?
That's a great point. So if they've set up to dominate the center,
right,
maybe with some rocky ground, you just blocked it, baby. So, cool. That's a great point. I don't have anything more to say about ruins.
Yeah, I know.
Do they have ruins at Adepticon?
They do. And I mean, I know we're running a little bit long here, Rodge. One of the challenges, right, is some of the terrain that you make is gorgeous to look at, but it can be tricky to play on. So I've seen ruins that are spectacular. They look like Roman collapsed towers and bits and stuff. But then I also have to be able to get my figures in there. So if the pieces can't come out, like lift them up and out, then my figures are all falling into my 12-man unit, can't even hardly fit in there, and they're all helter-skelter, standing on the column. So it's a tricky thing, like both making something that's attractive but also easy to use.
Yeah, so all my Saga terrain is removable. I think if you play a lot of Saga, you should just do that. So
yes.
I have the lovely columns and stuff. My ruins are like that, but they're just not stuck to anything, and I can just pull them off.
Perfect.
I like that flexibility, so I think that's very useful. So lastly, we've got the good old woods. So good standby here. Good all-rounder. You can get plenty of them. Often the go-to choice for many a player. I don't know what to put down. Let's just put a woods right here. How many times have you heard that?
I would just say, just be careful, because I've been in a little event where my opponent dropped woods, and he dropped the woods partly in my deployment zone and then laying towards his direction, so it's directly towards him. And I had I had Great Kingdom, so I put my levy firearms guys in the woods to start the game, and then because he laid it there, I just advanced them up. They never left the woods. I'm increasing, I got the protection. So my point is, like, sometimes you drop stuff out just because it seems kind of cool, and like you said, I'll just put a woods down here. But be careful. Don't give your opponent terrain that they actually like and will make them happy. If they're smiling as you're putting the piece down, maybe fudge it a little bit away from that spot.
Yeah, the nice little lane out into the field there.
Exactly.
Excellent. So I think a lot of what we talked about already applies to woods. You can get big honking woods, nice small little wood pieces. So if you guys are nuts, you can have 4 full 1 foot potential terrain pieces here: hill, steep hill, field, and woods. So that's like a full third of your board could be covered in terrain if you guys are nuts. It's tougher you can't do that unless both of you agree to that madness, but you'll at least be able to get 2 big ones out, right? If I'm thinking about the usual. I guess it's not always the same. So some of that, like the battle hero cards and the scenarios, may modify this, but we're just thinking of, even most of those allow a lot of options in how you deploy stuff. So we talked a lot about terrain here today. Do you have anything else you want to say about terrain
can I
here,
pop
bud?
off one thing? Knowing, like, we just talked about things, I came across this and saw it for the first time, and I haven't seen it in person, but I understand, like, at the UK Saga World Cup, and I think it was someone in Spain was bringing out 2D mousepad terrain. And so I was just curious, like, not everyone has the time and inclination to make terrain. I mean, when you do, it can be gorgeous and it can be fun, and you can make it themed, and you can theme it to your board and your army, and it's all awesome. But if you don't have that time and interest, I found there is a seller. It's listed like under Noble Knight Games. It's called Lucas Schmidt Playmat 2D Foam Terrain Saga Full Tournament Set, and it's all the pieces, all the sizes, and it's like $50 shipped. And I mean, so it's like, I know you're losing the 3D aesthetic, but if you're playing on a mousepad mat and you drop mousepad stuff down, it's interesting. And they were doing that with the World Cup because everyone's traveling and they can't all drag their 3D terrain with them, right?
Just put it in a tiny little
that's it.
Whatever box you have your books on, and haul that in.
So it's an option. It's an idea.
Okay. That's really cool. I hadn't seen that before. So I guess there is some more terrain we could touch on. So they've added walls and fences are back in the Book of Battles there in the back. Have you played any games with them?
Not in the way back. No, I haven't.
Yeah, so those exist. Just out of completeness, I have to say that those exist, Monty. They have the rules for the buildings are in there as well. So I actually prefer to just use these as the ruins. I think that makes is so much better from a gameplay perspective versus what the old buildings were. Now, I'm sure I read what the new buildings do, but I haven't committed that to memory. So I do know.
Nor have I.
Adepticon, the terrain collection does have buildings in there. So do you know what are you guys going to use those as the buildings, or have they always?
I don't think so.
You just let it up to the players, or?
Yeah, I think lately I could be wrong. Unless you can put the units up on the roof, like some of the Arabesque stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think they mostly have farmed a lot of those buildings out, and they have substituted ruins in there for them.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so I think that's the better way to play them. It creates the problem, like you said, of being able to put your guys where you want. It's kind of a pain, but
yep.
You could make just like a 4x6 of your building or whatever, and then when no one's in it, the building's down. When somebody's in there, you pull the building up, and then you have your models laid out whichever way you want. We do have impassable terrain now with the Age of Magic, so. You've got the special terrains. We're not going to get into every one of those, the 6 different options, but a lot of them are impassable, from smaller to bigger size. So those add an interesting element to the game. I don't think they're necessary. In Age of Magic, you can fly over stuff.
Yep.
A lot of times it takes 2 moves to go around them, so maybe just having a forest would take 2 moves to get to them anyway. So it's not game breaking for me that I've seen, but it kind of adds an interesting element, I think. Is there any shenanigans with the impassable terrain that you found, or any strategies in particular? I mean, if they're coming at you over multiple turns, you can always kind of move to get behind, just keep getting behind it. But if they have multiple activations, they can usually just get there, go around, and there's always other units around and flyers and teleporting and all kinds of stuff. So that's why I don't think there's anything that I can think of. Anything you're thinking of there, Monty?
I haven't seen anything really game breaking, and my only thing that I remember really big was I ran Under Earth, which gets 2 pretty big footprints for here's my Under Earth tunnel, and they're both impassable. You pop out of them, and it kind of I tried it once and it was a disaster because remember how we talked about the Viking player being defeated in detail? Well, here's one good way to do it.
I put one up,
right. I was sending my units or one at a time, and Stench was like, "Yes, this is great. I will beat your army 1 unit at a time." Mm-hmm. Yeah, predictable.
That's
down
awesome.
In flames.
That's awesome. So yeah, just be aware about that stuff. The rivers don't exist in Saga except for those special scenarios, and I haven't really refreshed myself on exactly how those work. We got the big city scramble scenario in there, so we could do a part 2 here, Monty, if we wanted to get in that really nitty gritty. I got to table that for now. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't ponder that at this moment. But wow, we had a lot to talk about terrain here.
Yes, we did.
So,
that was a lot.
We jumped around a lot, but we had a lot of good stuff to say. So I guess in recap here, just think about your army, and I guess what terrain would work best with it, and start off with those couple pieces and just kind of see how it goes, and go from there.
Yeah, exactly. Great advice.
Mm-hmm. So that's it for this one, buddy. Nothing no contest, no nothing. There will be a contest announced next episode. You'll be able to paint whatever you want. So I don't want to hear anybody saying they just painted something, so now they can't paint something. Just hold it in reserve for next time. So makes sense as an argument.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. But well, this was fun. Excellent conversation as always, buddy. We're gonna do it again. I'll see you next time. Check you later, people. Out.
Bye-bye.
Saga.